Hello, and welcome to week 9 of the No BS Home Buyers Live series. This series is to help first time home buyers achieve the goal of actually buying a home without all the jargon and the runaround. So, I am here to just help you become a homeowner and teach you the steps along the way. So, the last 2 weeks, we talked about tracking your money and building savings. So, to build on that, we are going to be talking about something that confuses a lot of buyers, and that is should I pay off debt first or save for a house? Now, those two are very big decisions, and every buyer probably needs to make it. So, the answer, as many answers are in real estate, are it depends. So let's get into it a little bit more and talk about debt and how that plays into buying a home because you're going to see a ton of advice online. Um, Lots of loud people saying you shouldn't buy until you are 100% debt free, which in an ideal world would be fantastic. However, that's not really what actually happens. And actually, lenders don't require you to be debt free. And most of my buyers are not debt free. If they are, congrats. I'm very excited. And if you are debt free, congratulations. You're faster on your way to buying a house. But what lenders care about is not that you're debt free, but they do care about your debt to income ratio, or what is known as DTI. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about DTI and how to think strategically about paying debt so that way it benefits your DTI and not just paying off debt emotionally, which is typically what most people online or just random people are saying is to pay off emotional debt. But if your goal is to buy a house, that might not be the best way to go about it. So let's talk a little bit more about what DTI actually is. DTI is just simply your monthly debt payments divided by your gross monthly income. So I kind of have created an example that we're going to go through. We're going to call her Average Anna again. She makes about 55,000 a year, and her monthly expenses are $2,550. So if she makes around 55,000 a year, she's bringing in about 4,500 a month gross. So if we take the total debts, the 2,550 divided by 4,500, that puts her DTI at 57%, which when buying a house, that is going to be nearly impossible to get a loan with. 57% is quite high. So we're going to talk about her situation, and we're going to go through some examples of paying off some of her debt and what that would look like for her DTI. And just kind of talk about that. But let me tell you a little bit more about what debt to income ratios are. There's actually two types. There's the front end ratio and the back end ratio. So the front end ratio is just your housing, how much your housing is in comparison to your income. And then the back end ratio is housing plus all of your other monthly debts. So typically on loans, most conventional loans are going to want to see something under 45%. It's You can go higher than that. There's certain programs that allow it. It will be more beneficial to have higher credit. If you have a higher debt to income, your higher credit is going to help you still qualify. But typically, you're wanting to be under like 40% if you can. But I would say the average of what people are doing is probably that like low 40s is pretty common. Um, and it's not about how much you owe, like the actual quantity of debt. So like 100,000 in student loans, or da 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 da. It's more about the monthly payments and your monthly obligations, which are used to calculate the DTI. So mortgage professionals will talk about the 28-36 rule. What they're referencing is a 28% housing debt to income ratio and a 36% total debt to income ratio, or less. Everything can be less than that. That is considered a very healthy benchmark for a low risk buyer, is if their housing ratio is 28% or less and their total debt is 36% or less. So if you run your debt to income ratio and find out that you're within that range or under those, you're doing great. That is like prime for a mortgage professional. That's what a lender wants to see. Um, what I see a lot of buyers do and make a big mistake is when their goal is to buy a house, they think just paying off any debt is going to be super beneficial. But really, a lot of them are probably throwing extra money at the wrong debt. Not always, but without making a calculated effort and understanding exactly why you're paying off which debt, um, you can easily pay off the wrong one if your goal is to buy a house. So let's actually walk through my example here, and I am going to add this. So what you're going to see here is this is average Annie's score or her picture. So she's making $4,500 a month. Her housing or the house that she wants to buy is going to cost roughly $1,700 a month. So to find her housing DTI, we take that housing amount, the $1,700 divided by 4,500, and that puts us at 37, essentially 38%. So is she below the 28% guideline from the mortgage or the 2836 rule? No, she's not. She's pretty high in her housing of 38%. And honestly, on average, I would say most people are about a third of their income for housing. So typically around 33%. So the 28%, again, is a very healthy, low risk buyer. I wouldn't think that that would be the average. So she's still higher than probably the average at 38% versus like a 33%. So that's something to look at. But let's look at consumer debt to income, which is the other part of the equation. So she's got a car payment of her total amount on the car payment is $6,000. She's got $6,000 in credit card payments or debt, and then she's also got $28,000 in student loans. So the bank really doesn't actually care about those numbers. What they care about is in this gray column here, and that is the monthly payment on these. So her car payment is $425 a month, $150 in credit card minimum payments, and $275 in student loan debts. So when we add all of that up, that means she's got $850 a month in consumer debt. So divide that by the monthly income, and she would be at 19%, which if you're breaking it down this way, under 20% is pretty good on consumer debt. However, when we calculate them all together, the 850 plus the 1700, you get her total expenses of 2550 and divide that by the 4500. And it's kind of hard for me to see. And if I remember correctly, it is a 57% debt to income ratio, which is, again, pretty high. So let's say average Annie has $10,000 in her savings account that she's not sure what she should do with. Should she pay off her car? Should she pay off her credit cards? What makes more sense if she wants to buy a house in the next year? So let's look off paying credit cards, because most people will tell you to pay the highest interest rate first. And in most cases, that's going to be a credit card over a car payment. So let's just say she pays off the entire credit card balance of $6,000. So that changes her monthly over here under the calculating here consumer DTI in the gray. So that makes her monthly payment for consumer DTI $700. And that would lower her consumer DTI a little bit from 19 to 16. But the overall is where we really want to look. And it lowered it from 57 to 53%. So that's good. Still not quite where we need to be to get a loan. So she's going to have to do some more work in this case if she's paying off her credit card debt, just to continue to pay off more debt or, make more money. So let's look at the example if she pays off her car payment. So you see here car payment paid off, so that $6,000 is gone, and that monthly payment of I think it was $425 is now $0. So now her total monthly debt is $425, which significantly lowered her consumer debt to income ratio down to 9%. But when we look at the overall picture of her housing and consumer debt, it lowered it down to 47.2%. And that's actually a number that she could probably get a loan with. Obviously, you ideally want it even less than that, but there probably will be some sort of loan program that would work for her with that debt to income ratio. One thing we don't talk a lot about, but I think is worth calculating and looking at as well is not only your debts and your consumer debt, but your housing debt. If you can reduce your housing debt, whether that means buying less house or that means getting a better rent if you're just kind of looking at where you sit debt to income wise right now, if you can get a house for less rent, that can really help your debt to income look a lot better. Because I mean, like we said, average Annie here is at 38%. That's pretty high on the housing expense in comparison to how much she's bringing in a month. So just things to kind of look at, but I will make sure you have or something very similar to this to calculate your own debt to income ratios. So that way you can add up these numbers and really look at what actually makes more sense to pay off. Because again, when a bank is looking at debt to income, they're looking at monthly payments, not total balances. So it really helps to examine and break down what you are paying monthly and what you owe, to determine what to pay off. So also, just in general, when I'm thinking about how to pay off anything or debt in general, when buying a home is a goal, I have 3 steps that I kind of want to go through when analyzing this, so that way I can determine where my money is best spent. Or saved. So step one is to identify the high impact debts. So which debts have the highest monthly payments? Like, is it that car loan? And which ones are close to being paid off? Do you only have 2 more payments on your student loans and then that's gone? Well, obviously you should just pay off the student loans in 2 months rather than just pay off the car in most cases, just because it's almost done. And then which ones will free up the most cash flow? So when you break down your sheet and do your debt to income ratios, you can look at those things and really start analyzing. And then step number 2 is to not drain your savings blindly. So if, let's say, Annie only had $6,000 and instead of the 10 in this case, if she pays off her car or the credit cards and she has nothing in savings, she still is not ready to buy a house because she's going to need some money for closing costs, to have in reserves, and just to have a little bit of breathing room because something will come up when you buy a house. It doesn't matter. Something will cost some money. So liquidity really matters in those cases. So if it's completely draining your savings, it's probably also not a good option. And then step 3 is just run the scenarios. And I highly recommend doing this with a lender. Like, it is great to do this on our own and have an idea of what we want to chat with the lender, but do this with the lender because they can really tell you, like, hey, this loan program would need this debt to income ratio, this credit score, this, that, or the other thing. And they can help guide you and give you the best advice for your situation, for the loan programs available to you in your state, and in your area. So run the scenarios by yourself and then run them with a lender and see if something else makes sense. Because sometimes they can help you understand that paying off, 6,000 over here changes not a whole lot, like it did for Annie with the credit cards, or paying 6,000 on your car changes a lot of things and makes it very possible for you to get it home. So make sure you're looking at your strategy and then running that by the lender who is going to help you actually get a home loan, because they will have programs that have specifics that you won't know about. So let's talk about when to pay off debt versus when you should save for like a down payment. Typically, when I tell people they should be focusing on paying off debt is when their debt to income is like the only barrier to them getting qualified for a loan. If they have good income and good history, job history, and all of that stuff, and good credit, and debt to income is the only thing holding you back, well, then focus on getting that down because that will be the next step to getting a home loan. Also, if your monthly payments are really high, typically you want to kind of get that down one so you have more breathing room, but then you can also help with the debt to income, or you're just really close to qualifying. So if you're just almost there and debt to income is the issue, you should be paying off debt. When you need to be focusing on saving is when your debt to income is already healthy. If you are the 28-36 percentage ratios, like don't be saving to pay off debt. You should be focusing on saving for your down payment and closing costs. And then if you don't have any down payment funds whatsoever, you should probably save a little bit, at least for some sort of down payment and some sort of slush fund. There are different loan programs that you only have to come with, like I've had clients with $1,000 down. Um, but I still recommend you have some extra in savings. So if you have no savings whatsoever, I would start saving a little bit first, then focus on some debt to income, and then you can move back to saving for the down payment and whatnot. And then also, if you have very, very low interest debt with not very high monthly payments, I would then focus on probably paying the debt down because um, you're, I'm sorry, I would focus on saving because you're not doing a whole lot by paying the debt down. So focus on saving, especially if you can have a high yield savings account that pays more than what the debt is. Very unlikely because most debt is pretty expensive, but worth checking into. But in the case of buying a house or wanting to buy a house, not all debt is urgent. You don't have to be debt free to buy a house. Don't people tell you that uh, debt payoff and home ownership, they're not enemies. They work mutually exclusively. They are both financial tools, and you just have to be able to strategically analyze them and position yourself so that you are set up to buy a house, but also understanding what your debt picture looks like. So now that I have talked about all things DTI, debt, savings, I think it is time for you to take some action and you go through and determine your debt to income ratio. So go through and list all your debts, write the monthly payment next to each one, identify which one has the biggest debt to income ratio impact, AKA the largest monthly payment. And then don't make any moves, don't just pay off a bunch of debt without running the numbers first. Again, if you were trying to buy a house this year, look at it strategically. What benefits you the most? Are you needing to qualify for more house? Do you need to get your debt to income ratio a little better in order to do that? Or do you just need to get your debt to income ratio down so you can even get a loan at all? Smart moves will beat emotional moves any day. And having the people on your team and helping you out to understand this will help you get a lot further. So if you want help looking into your specific debt to income ratio situation, I am happy to help. And I'm definitely happy to connect you with a lender that's going to be able to connect you with a loan program that is best suited for you. But don't hesitate to reach out. We can book a free buyer's consultation call and then keep going from there and connect you with the right people. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, next week, we are going to be diving into all the different loan types and what all these crazy acronyms mean. Loans are like alphabet soup, FHA, VA, conventional. There's just all kinds of different ones. So we're going to break those down a little bit for you and teach you just kind of the basics on what the different programs are. And if you would potentially qualify for one, you can look at the information on them and decide. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, even outside of the lives. But if you would like a copy of the debt to income, essentially calculator, please let me know so you can start running your debt to income ratios as well. But until then, I will see you next week. And thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.